Imagine walking into a medieval cottage at midnight. You wouldn't find a family deep in a dreamless sleep. Instead, you'd see them sitting wide awake in the pitch black. Back then, people didn't sleep for 8 hours straight. They practiced segmented sleep, waking up for a 2-hour gap in the middle of the night. But here's the strange part. This wasn't a time for relaxation. Watch as the father rolls off a straw mattress and quietly slides his hand over the heavy iron bolts of the front door. He isn't just restless. He's checking for prowlers. He kneels by the central hearth, using a small iron poker to stoke the dying red embers, desperate to keep the heat alive in a room filled with freezing drafts. Across the room, the mother stands by a tiny, shuttered window slit. She doesn't open it. She just peers through the crack, scanning the silent village lane for the orange flicker of a stray fire spark or the shadow of a stranger. And then it gets worse. This watch period was considered the most dangerous time of the night because the darkness felt absolute. People believed the night air was physically heavy with disease and malevolent spirits. While the parents stood guard, they weren't just watching for burglars. They were listening for the sounds of things they couldn't explain. What happened next was a ritual of survival. They would pray, whisper to keep their spirits up, and wait for the second sleep to finally take over. In the medieval world, the night wasn't for resting. It was a shift of duty where one mistake could mean losing everything before the sun even rose. Imagine stepping out of a noisy tavern into the pitch-black streets of London in 1350. There are no streetlights here, and the darkness is so thick you can barely see your own boots. You see a man gripping a single, flickering tallow candle, its dim light shaking as he moves. He isn't just walking. He is performing a high-stakes balancing act on slick, uneven cobblestones. But here's the strange part. The ground isn't just wet from rain. Every few steps, the man freezes and presses his back against a cold stone wall. He looks up just as a wooden shutter creaks, open 3 stories above him. Without warning, a servant tips a heavy ceramic basin, sending a literal waterfall of night soil and household filth crashing onto the street below. If he's a second too slow, he's covered in waste. And then it gets worse. Beneath his feet, open-air sewers run like shallow rivers down the center of the lane. One wrong step means plunging his leg into a trench of bacteria and sharp debris. In an age without antibiotics, a simple scratched ankle from a fall into this filth was often a death sentence. What happened next was even more unexpected. To navigate this gauntlet, people started wearing pattens, clunky wooden overshows designed to lift them several inches above the sludge. You see the man clattering along on these wooden stilts, desperately trying to reach his door before his candle burns out. For a medieval city dweller, a simple walk home wasn't just a commute. It was a desperate struggle to stay clean, dry, and alive in a city designed to sink you. Imagine trying to sleep in a room so cold that your breath turns to ice before it hits the floor. Inside a massive stone manor in the dead of January, the night isn't for resting. It's a battle for survival. You see a young servant shivering in a thin, ragged wool blanket, desperately grabbing handfuls of dried straw and ferns. He's frantically stuffing the plants into the jagged cracks of a wooden window frame to stop a whistling, sub-zero wind from cutting through the room. But here's the strange part. The stone walls are actually making things worse. Instead of keeping the heat in, the damp stone pulls the warmth straight out of the air, and you can see a thin layer of white frost creeping across the interior walls. Nearby, a group of exhausted laborers doesn't sleep in separate beds. They lay packed together on a single, wide straw pallet, arms locked around each other to share every bit of body heat they have left. And then it gets worse. If the central fire goes out, the temperature drops so fast that blood flow to the fingers and toes begins to slow. The struggle isn't a metaphor. It's a literal physical effort of rubbing your arms and huddling against another human just to keep your heart beating until dawn. What happened next was often a grim reality. In the morning, the strongest worker would be the first to nudge the others, praying that everyone in the pile was still warm enough to move. In the medieval winter, the night was a silent predator that could take you in your sleep if you drifted too far from the group. Picture an elderly watchman standing alone on top of a creaking wooden gatehouse. The village below is silent, but his eyes are fixed on the horizon as he tightly grips a heavy iron bell. Suddenly, he sees it, a tiny, flickering orange glow rising from a distant thatched roof. He doesn't hesitate. He thrusts his flaming torch into the air and begins swinging the bell with all his might, the clanging iron shattering the midnight silence. But here's the strange part. The danger isn't just that one house is burning. In a world made of dry timber and straw, fire is a living monster that jumps from roof to roof in seconds. You see families bolt upright in their hay-filled beds, grabbing leather buckets and rushing into the street while they're still half-dressed. They don't have fire trucks. They have to form a human chain, passing heavy wooden pails of water from the village well to the growing blaze. And then it gets worse. If the wind picks up, the watchman knows he's already lost. A single floating ember can land on a neighbor's barn and ignite the entire district before the first bucket even reaches the flames. What happened next was a desperate race against time. Neighbors would actually use iron hooks to tear down the walls of perfectly good houses just to create a gap, hoping to starve the fire fuel. For the watchman, the night wasn't about catching thieves. It was about spotting the one spark that could turn the entire town into a pile of ash by sunrise. Imagine a mother kneeling on a dirt floor in the middle of the night, illuminated only by the weak orange glow of a single oil lamp. Her child is gasping for air, clutching at a red, swollen throat. The mother isn't looking for a doctor. She is frantically grinding pungent herbs and thick animal grease in a heavy stone mortar. She scoops up the sticky green paste and smears it directly onto the child's skin, her fingers shaking as she works. But here's the strange part. As she applies the medicine, she isn't just focusing on the herbs. She is rapidly whispering a frantic mix of holy prayers and ancient folk charms, believing the words are just as vital as the plants. She keeps glancing toward the dark corners of the room, terrified that the night air creeping in through the door is actually a physical poison trying to snatch the child's spirit away. And then it gets worse. In the deep gloom of a medieval cottage, it was almost impossible to see if a patient's skin was turning blue or if a rash was spreading. Every shadow looked like a symptom, and every flickering light made the child's face look more ghostly. What happened next was a desperate ritual. The mother would take a small iron knife and wave over the child's bed to cut the invisible sickness out of the air. This wasn't just a medical emergency. It was a high-stakes battle between a desperate parent and the terrifying, unseen forces that people believed ruled the midnight hours. Imagine sitting at a massive oak table in a great hall, surrounded by the smell of roasted venison and the glow of dozens of expensive beeswax candles. A powerful lord lifts a silver goblet to his lips, laughing with his guests as they tear into thick loaves of bread. But look closer at the men standing just a few feet behind his chair. These aren't servants. They are armored guards with their gloved hands resting firmly on the heavy iron hilts of their swords. But here's the strange part. The more powerful you are in the Middle Ages, the more you fear the dark. While the guests eat, the guards aren't looking at the food. They are scanning the deep shadows of the wooden rafters and watching the stone kitchen entrances for any movement. They know that a midnight feast is the perfect cover for a political rival to slip a dagger between someone's ribs. And then it gets worse. Every time a new servant enters with a tray of wine, the guards step forward, their boots echoing on the stone floor as they eye the server's hands. The air in the room is thick with tension, not celebration. What happened next was a constant game of survival. The lord would often have a taster eat a piece of every dish before he dared to take a single bite himself. Even in the height of luxury, the medieval night was never a time to relax. It was a high-stakes standoff where the brightest lights were only used to spot your enemies before they reached the table. Imagine a lone merchant desperately kicking his horse into a gallop as the sun dips below the horizon. He reaches the towering stone walls of the city, but he's seconds too late. You see him pulling hard on the leather reins, looking up in horror as the massive iron portcullis slams shut with a bone-shaking thud. The guards on the battlements look down and shake their heads. The city is officially under curfew, and the law says those gates cannot open for anyone until dawn. But here's the strange part. Being locked out didn't just mean a cold night's sleep. The area just outside the walls was a no-man's land, where the king's law essentially stopped working the moment the sun went down. You see the merchant lead his horse into a small thicket, his hand shaking as he tries to strike a flint to start a tiny, hidden fire. He isn't looking for comfort. He is trying to stay invisible. And then it gets worse. From the deep trailing, Only a few hundred yards away, the long, low howl of a wolf pack cuts through the air. The merchant quickly draws a short iron dagger and sits with his back against a tree, his eyes darting toward every snapping twig in the dark. What happened next was a grueling test of nerves. Without the protection of the city's stone walls, travelers were completely at the mercy of both starving predators and roving bandits who knew no help was coming. For a medieval traveler, being 5 minutes late to the gate wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a terrifying invitation to fight for your life in the wilderness.